The fact that tonight's topic is about Colombia, about a very beautiful place. Let me take you there. It is a city known as Chiquinquirá. It is part of the department of Boyacá, and it is a very beautiful city for many reasons. First, because it is a small city. Apparently, in the last census, it has some 60-something thousand inhabitants, and that means spread out, not only in the urban area itself, but outside as well. Taking into account that Mexico City has 9.2 million inhabitants, Chiquinquirá is a paradise. It only has 60,000 inhabitants because, in addition, many of the buildings preserve their original height. That is, 1 or at most 2 stories. Toward the outer part, there are already some buildings, but it is still a very small city in many respects, and with these delightful little streets where people stop to greet each other, to chat. You know that Colombians are very pleasant people who tend to have this habit of stopping greeting. They address each other formally, which is something very respectful. And they have an excellent coffee. Their coffee is delicious. But they are also cheerful, dancing, festive people, and in this place it is no exception. But also this site has this odd little flavor of these little streets, as if they keep ancient secrets, because it is an incredibly old city. Let me tell you that this small city in Boyacá is known as the religious capital of Colombia. And it is that in this place there is a very important church. It is a basilica, the Basilica of Our Lady of the Rosary of Chiquinquirá. It has a tremendous history. On December 26, 1586, there was an apparition through a canvas, something similar to what happened in Mexico with the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe. Back then, someone found a canvas abandoned in a hut that served as a chapel, which in reality had a thatched roof and was very damaged. It had practically faded. The image was a cotton cloth. It was not a very resistant material, and yet, when it was placed in a chapel, the image suddenly reappeared surrounded by gleams, and it has been considered a Marian devotion. In fact, with the passing of the years, the basilica was built there, which is a large church. And it is a very important church because it is also very old. Let me tell you that all this happens back in the 16th and 17th century. So Chiquinquirá became a, city for pilgrimages, for visits, and also a site with a very particular flavor. But let me take you back in time. Don't be fooled by those coquettish little streets and the friendly people and this whole delightful world of a small city in a semi-mountainous area of Colombia. In this place, in this beautiful city, there are many stories to tell. There are terrible stories, because out there, out on the highway, on the road, in 1962 there was a massacre. A guy, Jacinto Cruz Usma, whom they called Black Blood, murdered a bunch of peasants. The reason was never clear. That was in 1962, and that bandit Black Blood went here and there, causing horror among people. They were very hard times for Chiquinquirá, because this guy did whatever he felt like. And of course, he attacked here and there. Don't lose sight of the fact that those people, after all this happened, continued doing their misdeeds in this place. And then the other thing. Let me tell you that in 1967, in July, there was an earthquake in the whole region, but it hit Chiquinquirá extremely hard. It was a beast of 6.8 degrees. It knocked down part here, part there. It brought down part of 500 houses because very many houses ended up with damage to the walls to the roof. The streets cracked. Part of the school, an important school of the city, was horribly damaged. But perhaps what is most remembered is that the basilica itself was very damaged. That beautiful basilica that nowadays is already rebuilt suffered significant damage. The 2 towers collapsed. Part of the roof, of the central roof of the whole tiled area, collapsed, and also part of the facade, right where there are a couple of statues. And the terrible thing about it is that when the earthquake was happening around 5:30 on July 28th, July 29th, 1967, one of the statues broke. The head of the statue fell and hit a woman who was passing by and killed her. She was not the only victim. There were 5 more victims. It was something that worried everyone, and you know how people are. The basilica was damaged. That was not a good omen. That's not right. Surely calamities are going to befall here and there, And the rumors began. That image, that important image, the image of the Virgin of Chiquinquirá, had to be taken out of its basilica and taken to the Dominican monastery, there in a tiny chapel. They went to store the image, because obviously it could not remain in such a damaged church. Reconstruction work began. But that was remembered, and moreover, there was this strange feeling. However, and it is important to say it, life goes on. And life goes on no matter what happens. The fact is that by September, October, although what had happened was very much present and there were still stones fallen there and things like that, life went on and there was a lot of activity. This is a commercial capital. It is surrounded on all sides by fields of cultivation, agricultural areas. So many of those products pass through Chiquinquirá to go to the rest of the country. Even so, the highways are not especially good. In fact, in 1967, several of the roads that fed the city were unpaved roads. Not paved, but rather local roads. Even though these same roads connected to the great capital, Bogotá, which by the way is about 2 hours away, more or less. In that year of 1967, the reality is that the city was smaller. It is estimated that it must have had some 20-something thousand inhabitants. A marvel. There were 2 important schools. One of them was the normal school Sor Josefa del Castillo, important because from there teachers went out to the whole region. And then there was the Colegio del Sagrado Corazón de Jesús. Likewise, everyone knows each other. Obviously, they go to school and they know each other at school. Besides that, there are different neighborhoods. There is the El Salvador Hospital, which was actually an old house adapted to be a hospital. There are other churches. And here life begins early. At 5 in the morning, the church bells begin to ring. Yes, I know, not the ones of the Basilica, because they fell. But there are other churches and they start ringing at 5 in the morning. It's an alarm clock, people get up, get ready. People who go to the fields leave early, so they get ready. Those who are parishioners go to church, to 6 o'clock Mass. And while all this is happening, life begins to sprout. And so it was day after day after day. November of 1967. Some months have passed since that tragedy of the church's collapse and the earthquake. And good times are coming because Christmas is approaching toward the end of September. We are on November 25th, 1967. And the city is getting ready for a special event. It is the end of courses, the closing of courses. From there, the kids will have some vacation. And everyone is very happy because, besides, for the end of school, for the end of courses, events are held. Many events. Sor Josefa's normal school has prepared a special event at the Furatena Theater. There will be dances there and such, and they have to go very elegant. The same with the other school. They are going to wear a very nice uniform, very pretty clothes. It is a Saturday, a very cold Saturday. And as usual, Pam, 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 Pam. All the bells ringing at 5 in the morning. Thank God. Up everyone. We have to start with the hustle. And so they begin to get up, to comb their hair. Like that. By 6 in the morning, people send for breakfast. Could it be that you send the boy, the girl? Yes, boy or girl, it doesn't matter. Why? Because it is a very small and very safe city. So many kids go out around 6 in the morning running to grab the first pieces of bread. It is very common that the people in this locality, very early, at that time, 6:15, send to buy breakfast items. Milk, chocolate, bread, some eggs. There are different bread outlets. But at that hour, do you want me to tell you a secret? The bread is just out of the ovens. In general, all of Chiquinquirá around 6:30 in the morning smells marvelous. In the first place, because it is a mountainous area. And in the second place, because there is freshly made bread. And in this place, at different points in the city, there are bakehouses, ovens, and the smell, ladies and gentlemen, of freshly baked bread climbs up the walls. So people begin to go back and forth, and these kids, or else you send the domestic worker who has also gotten up to go for the bread, or the lady. The fact is that everyone runs to supply themselves, because although it is Saturday, one has to be on time for the closing events, and those who are not going to go to school have their occupations. The man who is going to the fields has to leave early. Everyone is prepared. It is curious, but that day many of the children go dressed in black. It is an outfit that they are going to use for their closing. It is black clothing. It is curious. Little suits. The thing is that they go running here and there. 7 in the morning strikes. The people who went to Mass have already left Mass and have already gone home. 7:30 in the morning. The doctors of El Salvador Hospital are arriving because the shift begins at 7:30. The chief physician, a relatively young man, is arriving, getting ready to attend to his day. It is a tiny clinic. There are 3 doctors and 5 nurses. It is a pleasant place. Illnesses are not many. Many injured people do not arrive. It is a perfect place to go learning things. The fact is that he arrives, gets out of the car, walks here, walks there, when suddenly he notices that there is something strange. Just crossing the door, he observes that there is someone running and shouting. Then, over there, a nurse comes at full speed, all alarmed. This man is about to take off the jacket he is wearing to put on the lab coat when someone starts pulling at his sleeve, begging him for help, shouting. He turns and sees a woman with wide, staring eyes, with an expression of horror, of true horror, shouting at him to please help her son. When he turns and looks at the child is there lying on the floor. He does not move. The doctor runs over there to take vital signs, to do something. He indicates that they take him to the bed, to where they can put him in order to examine him. But before he can even finish giving a diagnosis, someone else is pulling at him. When he turns, he sees a father coming in with a little girl who seems dead. He is carrying a little girl in his arms and is shouting, "Help! Help! Help!" The 3 doctors look at each other immediately. One over here, another over there, but suddenly someone else comes in through the door. Brings another child and another, and suddenly a young man of about 20-something, a big guy, last name Merchan, also comes in kind of off. But while this is going on here, let me tell you that the madness in the hospital is nothing, because out there in the street, a man who is arriving to town walking as always because he is going to do something, comes upon a child in the street, lying in the street. And immediately many other people begin to come out. A woman begins to shout, "Help! Help! Help! My brother! My brother!" And when she goes over to see what is happening, she has a kid lying there next to her. He hardly moves. She manages to get a car in which she stuffs several people and runs to the hospital. But when she gets there, there is not much to do. Let me tell you, there is not much to do because that place was overflowing with people who shout, who cry. Further on, in another of the houses, things are also getting very ugly because suddenly one of the kids, only about 11 years old, has said that he is getting dizzy, asking whether it might be that it is shaking again. But then he begins to turn very pale. Very odd, and suddenly, boom, he falls. The father picks him up to try to cheer him to see what is happening, and his other son falls, and then the girl also suddenly falls, as if suddenly everything were failing, as if the children of this town were dying. It is a generalized alarm. Someone runs out and says, "We are dying. We are dying." Someone comments, "It's the air, it's the air." But someone tells him, "No, you're crazy." Someone shouts, "It's the water. It's the water. What is poisoning us is the water." And then the employee who is around runs and warns the authorities that something is up with the water. They go up to close the intake so that there is no water, but that doesn't become clear. And then someone says, "It's the milk. It's the milk. We are poisoning ourselves with the milk." And they start dumping the milk. But while all this is happening, it is after 8:30 in the morning, and there are about 50 very serious children in the hospital, and at least 20 have died, in a small clinic. Imagine 3 doctors and 5 nurses, and there are 50 seriously ill and a lot more who are arriving. 20 children have died. Children who were getting ready to go to school. The chief physician realizes that this is a poisoning. This is not a disease. It is a poisoning. What is happening? This is very serious. He gives the order to induce vomiting. He is a guy who knows. He doesn't know what is happening. He doesn't know where this is coming from, so they begin to distribute onions. There is someone who had a little truck with onions, and into their mouths with onions, because that induces vomiting. But it cannot be done in all cases. Many of the children have arrived fainted. There is no way to induce it. They give them a bit of charcoal. They give them a bit of egg, trying to revive them, but many die in their parents' hands. They come in with their children dead. While all this is happening, from the local radio station the alarm is given that something is happening, that people are being poisoned. And there are rumors. This must be the work of some evildoer, like the case of black blood, something like that. Someone did this, and there is a coming and going of people, while someone has already managed to contact Bogota and has informed them. But what happens? Bogota is 2 hours away. When are they going to be able to get there? In the time it takes the doctors, specialists, toxicology investigators to prepare their things, they are going to take a while to get there. And while this is happening, every minute children are dying. It is madness, and they are mostly children. But don't think it's only children, because adults have also arrived, more or less adults, and some adults. The case of that guy Merchan, the 25-year-old man, has been very sad, because he arrived bleeding from the nose and mouth and suddenly died on them as if he had burst inside. A horrible thing. There are so many dead that there is nowhere to put them, so discreetly they are taking them to the back. There is a pasture out there. On the outside there is a pasture, and there they are placing the dead. Children above all, one next to another. It is something that frightens, that horrifies. And suddenly someone shouts, "This one is not dead." When they are taking out the little body of another child, they realize that one is alive, and they bring him and manage to place him and give him IV fluids and manage to revive him a little. Although he was not entirely well, the risk was very high. While all this is going on, it is noon. By this time, there is a brutal number of dead. At least 38 or 40, children mainly, have died, but there are 200 people who are presenting symptoms. And before the afternoon fell, they would be 500. It was madness. The doctors don't know where to look. Other local doctors, some 9 doctors who attended in their private practices, have joined the effort. Common and ordinary people have arrived, people who are out walking with their car or whatever. They have volunteered to bring in the sick, to bring in people who were lying in the street, to bring them to the hospital to see if somehow there is any help. One of these people realized that he had made a grave mistake, because when he went out to see what was happening, he left his family unattended, and when he returned, 3 of his daughters had died. That has been repeated everywhere, and there is a terror among people because they do not know what is happening. The authority from Bogota has not arrived, so the little that can be done is what the doctors there at El Salvador are doing, and the priests. The priests are making their effort to give the last rites to everyone, because they do not know who is going to die and who is not. Some seem to recover, but soon they decline again. It is such a strange situation, and the worst thing is that they do not know where this is coming from. When at noon, a little past noon, the doctors from Bogota and the experts from Bogota begin to arrive, the scene is terrible. There is total panic. People are in panic because they do not know if it is the air, if it is the water, if it is... So immediately the investigation begins. They begin to ask here and there, where did this start? And no one knows. No one knows how this began. It is evident that there is a poisoning. This is not a matter of disease. It is not a bacterium, Salmonella. This is a severe poisoning. When they examine the first body, they realize that the lesions are typical of an intense poison, of a very strong poison. But who could have done this? Do you remember that there had been terrible things here? Well, that is exactly what gets into their heads. And worse yet, because the rumor spreads that that is what happened, that someone poisoned, and obviously people tremble because people are continuing to fall ill. By the afternoon of that November 25th, 1967, the sick are not only the children. The adults who had been seeing the children, bringing them, also begin to fall ill, and they begin to feel dizzy, to weaken, and very soon they are fainted on a bench next to the hospital, lying around. It is madness. Do you want me to tell you something? The authorities have no idea what is happening. Where is the beginning of this? Here, people were doing their daily routine, the same as always. People are not in a single place. For example, some of the poisoned come from one neighborhood, others from another, others from another. They are not in the same place such that one could consider there had been a very specific source of poisoning. There wasn't. There was something wrong here. And then a man appears, Pedro Osorio. He is a very dry, very serious man who comes up and says to them, "It's the bread. How could it be the bread? In this city there are numerous bakeries. How could that be?" And then he explains that early in the morning his daughter didn't want to eat the bread. They had, as always, gone to the bakery. And on the way back, as they were getting ready for breakfast, the girl, "This bread tastes like poison. It smells like poison." He had scolded her because that is not to be done. That is almost a sin. It is rejecting food. And that was not right. Nonetheless, the girl did not eat it. Secretly, she crumbled it and gave it to the chickens. The chickens were dead. That immediately sounded like that was it. The source was that. And the word spread, and they began to say, "It's the bread. It's the bread. The bread is poisoning people." But how could that be? And someone says, "They are right. Here's the body of one of the employees of a bakery." And that is when they realized that the whole origin of this problem was a bakery. This place was known as Nutibara, a bakery, a small bakery. It was not the main one in the city. And yet it was very famous because it was inexpensive and very tasty. In this place, about 6,000 pieces were prepared during the night shift. As it happens, Merchan, that young 25-year-old man who arrived bleeding from the nose, made the bread. He was the night shift worker, the one who had prepared the breads that dawn for people to eat. Immediately they set about going there and realized that the owner of the Nutibara bakery has run through the streets shouting, "Don, eat the bread. Don't eat the bread. The bread is poisoned." His own bread. The authorities arrive and begin to investigate because obviously when they ask Mr. Osorio where he bought the bread, he tells them Nutibara, and they go there and investigate it. The bakery was a house. It was a very simple thing, yet it was the favorite because it was the best bread of all. They get there and begin to investigate and, well, they realize that something is not right, and they realize it very quickly. Just by entering the storage area, a peculiar smell can be perceived. A strange little smell that comes from the sacks of flour with which that morning's bread was prepared. When one of the toxicologists arrives and begins to handle it, he realizes that that has this penetrating smell. Garlic. And that is when one of the owners says, yes, indeed, the one who was preparing it said, it smelled like. But I didn't think it was true because surely he was hung over. Over there they call it guayabo, that he had the guayabo, that is, that he had been drinking. And then comes a tremendous story. Upon analyzing that, they quickly realize that yes, indeed, that has poison. The smell is characteristic of a product known as Folidol. Folidol is parathion, a powerful insecticide used for crops, and so powerful that it is diluted at 300 milliliters per 100 liters of water. How had this gotten into the flour? And how had this not been noticed? It was strange. How could it have gotten there? The sacks are analyzed, and yes, indeed, that had been in contact with the Folidol. The baker who had prepared it had died. And that is because a custom that existed among bakers was that at the end of the shift, once they had left the bread baskets full of bread, they ate a couple of pieces fresh out of the oven. The most delicious thing there can be is a freshly prepared bread. Freshly baked, delicious. He wolfed it down. He died. The investigation goes on. What had happened there? In reality, once the people who were in serious condition had been stabilized, some were transferred to Bogotá. Medical assistance personnel arrived. Even the Minister of Health himself came to attend personally, treating people, issuing prescriptions. The case is analyzed, and once they have news that it concerns this compound of parathion in its Folidol version, they already know that it is treated as a toxin, such and such and such, and the instruction is given for a sort of antidote that manages to save many lives. It would take a while for it to arrive and for them to be able to contain it. At the end of the day, that had been madness. 78 people had lost their lives, mainly children. The children who were going to go to the event, the children who were going to go to their end-of-courses party, the children who had gone to buy the bread that morning, happy because they were going to gobble down a tasty, freshly baked roll. They had found death. Families in which 4 of the children had died, families in which the mother and 3 children had died, families in which the father was poisoned, but for some reason adults were not as affected. And in fact, another of the bakers from that early morning shift in the Nutibara bakery had eaten 3 pieces and didn't even have symptoms. Nothing happened to him. The authorities then began the task first of burying these bodies. It was a terrible thing. The cemetery only had 1 grave digger normally. In a critical moment there had been 3 deaths, and suddenly there were 78 bodies to bury. Sadly, it was necessary to bring people from other places. Soldiers arrived to support the digging tasks in order to give Christian burial to all those bodies. The same had happened, 1 day or 2, to be able to fulfill all that, the ceremony. Even the President of the Republic at that time went to accompany the burial. A very hard moment and with many questions. How had that compound reached that preparation, that flour, that dough to make the bread? Because in others it had not happened, and so they begin to look a bit into the origin of that. From where did a compound of this nature come? This served to fumigate potatoes, for the bugs. Therefore they began by investigating who sold it, who had sent this product to Chiquinquirá, and they found it there in Bogotá, in the capital. They found a shipment. Days before, 24 bottles of Folidol had been sent to a small business. There, near this, there was a business that sold agricultural products. It was a kind of feed store that was in charge of marketing this product. They went there and asked what had happened, and the owner of that place told them, "Well, yes, I bought several boxes of Folidol and I had a problem the night they brought it to me. Several of those boxes came broken. In fact, I had fights with the carrier, Transportsman Toka it was called, because they had brought the boxes upside down, that is, face down, and 1 or 2 bottles were broken and they didn't want to reimburse me. The transport had been in a small, very rustic truck. It was a very old truck and in poor condition which had been improperly loaded. They went on investigating, and when they ran into the driver, he admitted that he did not know what he was carrying. Being in Bogotá, after delivering a shipment of something, he had gone to a company where they loaded him with things, and they had filled him with sacks of flour and boxes of different things without telling him exactly what it was. He had not even noticed that when he returned to Chiquinquirá, he had to spend the night waiting because he arrived late. When he delivered those boxes, the owner scolded him and demanded that he pay him, and he told him to buzz off. After that, he went to sleep, meaning he left the truck loaded with the sacks of flour all night. The next morning, he went to the bakery, unloaded that, and they immediately proceeded to use it to prepare that morning's bread, not realizing that at least 10 of the 30 sacks the truck carried had been bathed in Folidol. When that young baker Merchant begins to prepare the dough, he says to his boss, "This dough smells odd. It smells like garlic, and I feel a little dizzy. Might it be that it has gone bad?" And the owner of the bakery says to him, "No, man, they just brought it to us. How is it going to be bad? It's that it feels kind of damp. That happens sometimes. The truck must have gotten wet. And now prepare it quickly because otherwise it's going to spoil." And it was then that they prepared the 6,000 breads. They were economical, at 20 each piece, which meant that a family could have eaten 10 or 20 pieces easily. Of course, some of the pieces had higher concentration of the toxin. But, in most houses, the first to have breakfast were the children, and these kids who began by having their bread for breakfast, happy and chatting and laughing, thinking about what they were going to do that Saturday, that cold Saturday in November, were the first to begin to feel ill. As a consequence, upon realizing this, the adults panic, They see their son fall fainted, and they did not have breakfast. And so it went. The children were the most affected. The authorities took matters into their own hands. The first thing was to investigate the culpability of each one. But there was not much to investigate, because when suddenly they realized, a mob arrived at the bakery and tried to lynch the owner. He had to be taken from there, but the place was destroyed. Today, there is nothing left of that. In that place, a new house was built. The issue here was that this man was detained by the authorities. He spent a couple of months in prison. The driver was also detained to investigate. He spent a couple of months in prison. But at the end of the day, neither of the two had direct responsibility. It had not been intentional. It had not been with malice. Nor did they have any reason to know it. The baker had no reason to know that that was in the flour, although people thought he did. So he had to leave. He would die sometime later. There are two versions. One, that he died of natural causes. Another, that he died run over. What is a fact is that he never returned to Chiquinquirá and ended his days in a very sad way. He never forgave himself for having done that, for having allowed that to happen. As for the truck driver, it was all the same to him, and he continued working many more years. The account was closed with about 2,000 people affected. That is to say that to some degree they had injuries as a result of that poisoning. About 500 presented serious injuries, and it is estimated that 78 little ones and a couple of adults died. The figures, however, may be different. For some specialists, these figures are very low. It could have been much higher. At least it is estimated that 100 children lost their lives because some were taken to Bogotá and were not recorded as part of the tragedy. That was finished. The burials, and so on. With the passage of time, the church was restored again. The Virgin of the Rosary of Chiquinquirá returned to the altar where she has always been. Other bakeries began to work. Those stories were forgotten. The earthquake was forgotten. The dead were forgotten, except for the people who lost their entire family. That was being consigned to oblivion. But it turns out to be a story that shows us how fragile we are, how little our life is assured, how little we can do in a situation like this. Something so absurd as a bottle of something breaking on top of some sacks of something else meant the death of some 100 little ones. But still, and the story would not end, the burials were there, in the town cemetery. Graves had to be opened, and more graves, and quickly, because, moreover, the bodies could not be left just like that. There was nowhere to keep them. There were no morgues. There were not enough coffins either. So coffins had to be brought from other towns, brought in trucks of the military and so on, in order to bury everyone. That's where that ended. And do you want me to tell you something? For years, the people of Chiquinquirá have told that in the cemetery, when night falls, laughter is heard, games are heard, children's voices are heard, especially when winter approaches and when Christmas approaches. For many years, the relatives of those children who died took little gifts to the graves, decorations, things, toys, some little candy. And since then it was told that in this place there were child ghosts. Even years ago, around 2018, there was a series of audio and video recordings made there. I have not had the opportunity to see them, but it is said that they were able to document EVP in which laughter was heard, children's games, the children of Chiquinquirá. A tragedy that perhaps could have been prevented, a tragedy that was foretold according to others, and that the tragedy itself would have been the product of a kind of punishment for the evil of the world. How to know? Perhaps it was only the imprudence of a driver who did not see what he was carrying, of a man who loaded something without warning that he was carrying poison, of a baker who did not check what he was doing. But are tragedies like that? Do things happen because it is a sum of factors that triggers a disaster, or what would you think?